He walked into the house with a heavy expression, holding the box that carried the birthday cake. The air inside felt warm. Soft music played from the small speaker on the counter and colorful balloons floated in the corner of the living room. She had done her best to make the house look festive. It was supposed to be a small celebration, just the two of them after a long, tiring week. She smiled as soon as she saw him. "Finally, you're home," she said softly, wiping her hands on a towel. "I thought you'd be late again." He didn't smile back. Instead, he placed the cake box on the table with a louder thud than necessary. The tension in his face was clear. "I picked up the cake," he said in a flat tone, "but I didn't know it was going to cost that much. You didn't tell me it was that expensive." Her smile faded a little, though she tried to stay calm. "It's just a small cake," she replied. "I thought you wouldn't mind since it's your favorite. You always liked the red velvet one from that bakery." He crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. "Yeah, but it was almost $50 for a cake. That's just crazy. You could have made one at home," she sighed softly. "I would have, but I wanted it to be special this time. You've been working so hard. I thought you deserved something nice." Her voice was gentle, but his irritation only seemed to grow. Maybe it wasn't really about the cake. Maybe it was about everything that had been building up. The stress, the bills, the endless routines that made both of them feel like they were just surviving instead of living. He shook his head, muttering under his breath. "Special, huh? What's special about wasting money?" She paused, watching him carefully. She didn't want this to turn into an argument. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said quietly. "It was just a little surprise. You don't have to be upset." But his pride had already taken over. "It's not about being upset," he snapped. "It's about respect. You should have told me before spending money like that." She looked down for a second, hurt but trying to keep her composure. "It's not like I went behind your back. It's just a cake for your birthday. I thought it would make you happy." The sound of her soft voice made the silence heavier. The lights flickered slightly, and the faint smell of the cake filled the air. She had even lit a small candle, ready to surprise him with a quiet moment of joy, a moment she now realized might never come. He took a deep breath and rubbed his forehead. "You just don't listen sometimes," he said. "You think everything has to be done your way." That sentence cut deeper than he probably meant it to. She had spent the entire afternoon preparing, cooking his favorite meal, cleaning, decorating the house, even changing into the dress he once said made her look beautiful. But now none of that seemed to matter. Her hands trembled a little as she folded the towel and set it aside. "I'm sorry if I made a mistake," she whispered. "I really didn't mean to cause a problem." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened the cake box, stared at the perfectly decorated red velvet frosting, and then closed it again sharply. The tension in his jaw was visible. "I don't even feel like celebrating anymore," he muttered. She blinked, unsure what to say. "You don't mean that," she said quietly. "It's your birthday. Don't let something small ruin the evening." Her calmness should have softened him, but sometimes when frustration builds for too long, even kindness feels like pressure. He turned away from her and kicked off his shoes, pacing the small kitchen as if he was looking for something else to blame. "You always say that," he said bitterly. "Every time something goes wrong, you tell me not to make it a big deal. But maybe you just don't understand how much pressure I'm under." His voice rose slightly, not loud enough to sound like yelling, but sharp enough to sting. She stood there silently, giving him space to speak. "I'm tired," he continued. "Tired of working, tired of paying for everything, tired of feeling like I'm never enough. And then you go and spend money on a cake like it's nothing. You don't get it." Her eyes softened. She wanted to tell him she did understand. She wanted to remind him that she worked long hours too, often skipping breaks and staying late to help others. But she didn't say it. She knew this wasn't the moment for comparisons. Instead, she said gently, "I know things have been hard lately, but we're supposed to be on the same team, remember? It's your birthday. Let's just sit, eat, and talk. We can deal with everything else later." But the moment had already slipped too far. He looked at her, his frustration clouding his judgment. "You think everything can be fixed with a smile and a piece of cake," he said harshly. "That's not how life works." She blinked, her heart aching at the tone. "I didn't mean to make things worse," she said softly. "I just wanted to make you happy." He let out a bitter laugh, one that didn't sound like him. "Happy? Do I look happy to you?" She took a small step closer. Please don't be upset. We can talk about the money later. Let's not let this ruin the night. But his frustration reached a boiling point. Maybe it was the months of stress, the long days, or the feeling of being unheard. All of it exploded in that single moment. Without thinking, he grabbed the cake box, lifted it off the table, and tossed it down in anger. The box fell open, the cake sliding across the table and splattering onto the floor. A streak of red and white frosting smeared her dress and the clean tile she had polished just hours earlier. For a second, time froze. The music still played softly in the background, completely out of place against the shock that filled the room. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared at the mess, her mind blank. The smell of sweetness filled the air, but it no longer felt pleasant. He realized what he had done almost instantly. His hands dropped to his sides, his breathing heavy. The anger that had burned inside him only moments ago suddenly vanished, leaving behind guilt and silence. She slowly looked up at him, not with anger, not even disappointment, but something deeper. It was sadness mixed with disbelief. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. The guilt on his face was clear. I didn't mean, he started, but she turned away before he could finish. She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. It was just a cake, he couldn't answer. The weight of the moment pressed on both of them. Instead of shouting or crying, she walked to the sink, picked up a wet cloth, and began to wipe the frosting off the floor. Each movement was slow, controlled, as if she was holding herself together piece by piece. He wanted to help, to say sorry, to take back what just happened. But shame held him still. He just stood there watching her clean up the cake meant for him. The soft sound of the cloth rubbing against the tiles filled the room. The decorations that once looked joyful now felt out of place. The balloons seemed to float in quiet disappointment. After a few minutes, she stood up, washed her hands, and turned off the music. The silence that followed was heavy, almost painful. He finally spoke, his voice low and shaky. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to do that. She didn't look at him. I know, she said simply. But you still did. Those words hit him harder than any anger could. She didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't fight back. And somehow that made him feel even smaller. She walked past him and went to their bedroom without another word. The door closed gently behind her, leaving him standing alone in the quiet kitchen. He looked down at what was left of the cake, a ruined mix of red, white, and crumbs scattered across the floor. What was supposed to be a simple celebration had turned into something neither of them expected. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The smell of frosting lingered in the air, a reminder of how quickly love could turn into regret. The candles sat on the counter, still unlit. The gift she had wrapped earlier in a small silver box remained unopened beside them. He stared at it for a long time, the weight of his actions sinking deeper with every passing second. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quiet room. Her hands rested on her lap, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. She wasn't crying because of the cake or even the argument. She was crying because she had seen a side of him she never thought she'd see. Downstairs, he whispered again as if she could hear him. I'm sorry. But the silence answered back, and in that silence, both of them realized something had changed that night. The night felt heavier than usual. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Downstairs, he was still sitting at the table, staring at the mess he had made. The cake that was meant to be a symbol of love now looked like a symbol of regret. The smell of it, once sweet, now made him feel sick to his stomach. Upstairs, she sat quietly in the dark.
She hadn't turned on the lights.
Her hands rested on her knees and she stared at the floor, lost in thought. Her heart still raced, not from anger but from sadness. The whole thing felt unreal. 1 minute she was preparing for a small birthday surprise, and the next, the man she loved had thrown the very thing she bought for him. She thought about walking out of the house for a while just to breathe, but she didn't. Something deep inside told her to stay calm. Maybe walking away too quickly would only make things worse. So she sat there, breathing slowly, letting the quiet surround her. Downstairs, he finally stood up. The sight of the ruined cake was too much to look at anymore. He grabbed some paper towels and tried to clean up the frosting on the floor. Every swipe reminded him of how thoughtless he had been. He could still hear her voice in his head, calm, steady, and disappointed. It was just a cake, she had said. Those words haunted him more than if she had yelled. When the floor was finally clean, he threw the paper towels away and leaned against the counter. He wanted to go upstairs and apologize again, but shame held him back. He didn't know what to say that could fix what he had broken. Sometimes saying sorry felt too small for the damage done. He finally gathered the courage to walk upstairs. The hallway light flickered softly as he approached the bedroom door. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked lightly. There was no response. He opened the door a little and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't look up. She was calm, too calm, and that made his chest ache. "I cleaned up the mess," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I'm sorry. I really am. I don't know what got into me." She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You were angry," she said softly. "You took it out on me." He lowered his head. "I know, I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that." She didn't reply right away. The silence between them stretched, filled with emotions neither could describe. Then she said, "I didn't do all of this to upset you. I wanted to make you happy. I thought you'd walk in smiling." He walked a little closer, still keeping some distance. "I know, I should have seen that. I was just tired, frustrated, but that doesn't excuse what I did." She nodded slowly, still calm. "No, it doesn't." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was soft, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that came from disappointment. He could feel how deeply he had hurt her, not because she said it, but because she didn't need to. Her quiet was louder than any argument they had ever had. He sat on the edge of the chair near the window. "I feel terrible," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I keep thinking about how you looked when I threw that cake. I don't know what's wrong with me." She took a deep breath. "There's nothing wrong with you," she said gently. "You just forgot who you are for a moment. But what hurts the most is that you forgot who I am, too." Those words hit him like a wave. He looked up at her, his eyes wet. "You're right, I forgot. I shouldn't have done that to you." She gave a faint, sad smile. "Do you know what I was thinking when it happened?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I thought about how much we've been through together," she said. "All the times we supported each other, laughed, struggled, and kept going. And then for a second I wondered if we'd lost all of that." Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept herself steady. He wanted to reach out and hold her hand, but he wasn't sure if she'd let him. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he whispered again. "I was stupid." "You were hurt," she said. "And instead of talking to me, you let it come out as anger. I understand being tired and frustrated. We both are. But hurting each other doesn't solve anything." He nodded slowly, unable to find the right words. Then, to his surprise, she stood up and walked to the small table near the window. On it was a second box he hadn't noticed before. She opened it and took out a smaller piece of cake, one she had set aside earlier, just in case something went wrong with the first one. She placed the slice on a plate and set it on the nightstand between them. He looked at it, confused. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. She looked at him with calm eyes. "Because this night was supposed to be about love, not anger. You made a mistake, yes, but I'm not going to let one moment destroy everything we've built." He felt his throat tighten. Her kindness broke something inside him, the wall of pride and frustration he had been carrying for months. "I don't deserve this," he said softly. "Maybe not tonight," she replied, her tone honest but gentle. "But I still believe in you. I believe you can be better than your worst moment." For the first time in hours, he felt something warm inside him, not joy, but gratitude. Her ability to stay calm, to choose love when she had every reason to walk away, amazed him. They sat in silence for a while. The tension in the air slowly began to fade. He finally gathered the courage to reach for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "I'll make it up to you," he promised. "I don't want you to ever feel like that again." She squeezed his hand lightly. "I don't need big promises," she said. "Just effort. That's all." He nodded, holding her hand tighter. After a few minutes, she got up, went to the kitchen, and returned with 2 forks. She handed one to him and said with a small smile, "Eat. It's still your birthday." He couldn't help but smile back, though his eyes were still wet. "After what I did, I don't think I deserve cake." She chuckled softly, a sound that felt like a small light breaking through the dark. Then think of it as forgiveness, not celebration. They both sat quietly, sharing the small slice of cake in the dimly lit room. The sweetness tasted different now. It wasn't about the cake anymore, but about understanding, patience, and second chances. After a while, he said, "I'll clean the rest tomorrow morning. I'll buy you a new dress, too. I ruined yours." She shook her head gently. "It's just a dress. What matters is that we learn from this." Her ability to forgive didn't mean she had forgotten. It meant she was choosing peace over pride. That choice alone humbled him more than anything else ever could. Later that night, when the lights were off and the world outside was silent, he lay awake beside her. He could hear her steady breathing, and he thought about everything she had done that day, how she had worked, cooked, decorated, and tried to bring joy into their tired little home. And instead of appreciating it, he had let his anger ruin the moment. He turned toward her and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She didn't answer. She was already asleep. But he knew she had heard him somehow. The next morning, he woke up early, earlier than usual. The first thing he did was walk to the kitchen. The balloons were still hanging, though some had started to sink a little. He picked up the remaining decorations, cleaned every corner, and took out the trash. It wasn't about fixing the mess. It was about showing that he cared enough to start making things right. When she walked in later, still in her robe, she found him at the table with breakfast ready and the place spotless. He looked up at her nervously. "I wanted to do something right today," he said. She smiled softly. "You already did," she said. For a moment, they just looked at each other, both realizing that love wasn't about perfect moments. It was about how they handled the broken ones. He reached out, pulled out the chair for her, and said, "Let's start over?" She sat down, nodded, and said, "We already have." And as the morning light filled the kitchen, it felt like the warmth had returned, not just to the room, but to their hearts as well. The next few days passed slowly, but something felt different in the house. The tension that once filled the air had softened. There was still quiet between them, but it wasn't the cold, uncomfortable kind. It was gentler now, almost healing. He tried to do small things to make up for what happened, things he hadn't done in a while. He started helping her around the house again. He folded the laundry, washed the dishes, and even cooked breakfast once or twice. It wasn't about the chores. It was about showing her that he cared, that he was trying. One evening, she came home after a long day at work. The smell of food greeted her as soon as she walked in. He had cooked dinner, her favorite. The table was neatly set, with soft music playing in the background. She stopped at the doorway, surprised. "You cooked?" she asked with a little laugh. He smiled nervously. "I tried. I can't promise it tastes good, but I didn't burn anything this time." She smiled for real, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since that night. "That's already better than last time," she teased gently. They sat together and ate. The food wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the effort. For the first time in weeks, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about work, about small things, about memories that made them both laugh. Halfway through dinner, he looked at her and said quietly, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that night." Her expression softened. "I figured you would," she said. "I can't stop replaying it in my head," he admitted. "Not because of what I did, but because of how you reacted. You didn't yell. You didn't walk away. You just stayed calm. And that did something to me. It made me realize how patient you are. How strong." She looked down at her plate, trying to hide the emotion in her eyes. "I wasn't strong," she said softly. "I was hurt. But I also knew that reacting in anger wouldn't help either of us. Someone had to stay calm." He nodded slowly. "That someone was you. You could have given up on me right then, and I wouldn't have blamed you." "I thought about it," she said honestly. "For a moment I did. But then I remembered everything we've been through. We've had good years, hard years, and everything in between. I didn't want one bad night to erase all of that." Her words stayed with him. There was something about the way she said them. Simple, honest, and full of quiet love. After dinner, they went for a short walk outside. The air was cool, and the sun had just started to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. They walked side by side in silence for a while before he said, I don't think I've ever told you how much I appreciate you. She looked at him curiously. You've said it before. Not like I should have, he said. I took you for granted. You've done so much for me and I didn't see it. I was too focused on what I didn't have instead of being grateful for what I do. She gave him a small smile. It's never too late to see it. He nodded, then took her hand gently. You amaze me, he said softly. I mean it. That night I saw something in you that I'll never forget. You taught me what real love looks like. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, patient, and forgiving. Her hand tightened around his. Love isn't about being perfect, she said. It's about showing up even when things get messy. They walked a little further before heading home. Inside, he sat at the table and began writing something on a small notepad. She watched from across the room, curious. What are you writing? She asked. He smiled without looking up. Something I should have written a long time ago. When he was done, he tore the paper from the pad and handed it to her. It was a note, handwritten, messy, but sincere. It read, I'm sorry for every time I made you feel small. I'm sorry for letting stress turn me into someone you didn't recognize. I don't want to be that man anymore. I want to be someone you can trust, someone who brings peace instead of pain. Thank you for not giving up on me. As she read the words, her eyes welled up. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, and he could see forgiveness written all over her face. She folded the paper carefully and said, Thank you for this. It means a lot. That night, something changed between them, something quiet but powerful. It wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about learning from it. The next morning, he surprised her again. When she walked into the kitchen, she found another small cake sitting on the table. This time, he had baked it himself. It wasn't perfect. The frosting was uneven and the writing on top looked clumsy. But it said, New Beginning. She stood there in disbelief, covering her mouth with her hand. You baked this? She asked, laughing softly. He shrugged shyly. Well, I tried. It took me 3 YouTube videos and 2 failed attempts, but I got there. She couldn't stop smiling. It's beautiful, she said. Even if it's not perfect. He walked up beside her. I wanted to fix what I broke. Not just the cake, us. I wanted to show you that I learned something. She looked at the words on the cake again. New beginning. They couldn't have been more fitting. They sat down and cut the cake together. The first bite made her laugh. It's a little too sweet, she said, scrunching her nose playfully. He chuckled. Guess I overdid the sugar. It's okay, she said. We could use a little extra sweetness anyway. The laughter that filled the room was soft but full of meaning. It was the kind of laughter that comes when 2 people decide to heal instead of hurt. Over the next few weeks, things continued to change. He started opening up more, not just about his stress, but about his fears, his hopes, and his dreams. She listened without judgment, just as she always had. In return, she began to lean on him more, too. For years, she had been the strong one, the peacemaker, the one who held everything together. But now she allowed him to be there for her as well. It wasn't one person carrying the other anymore. It was both of them walking side by side. One night, as they were cleaning up after dinner, he said quietly, You know, I used to think love was about big gestures, gifts, surprises, things like that. But now I realize it's about moments like this. The quiet ones, she nodded. It's about choosing each other, even on the hard days. He smiled. Especially on the hard days. They looked at each other for a long time, no words needed. The understanding between them had grown deeper than ever before. Later that night, he went into the living room and picked up the small silver box she had wrapped weeks ago, the one that never got opened on his birthday. He brought it to her. I think I'm ready to open this now, he said softly. She smiled and handed it to him. Go ahead. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple keychain, a tiny piece of metal engraved with the words, Love never gives up. He looked at it for a long moment before saying, You really knew what you were doing that day, didn't you? She smiled. I was hoping it would remind you of us. He held the keychain tightly. It does. It always will. The night ended with both of them sitting close, talking quietly about the future, about where they wanted to go, what they wanted to build, and how they'd make sure they never lost sight of what truly mattered again. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't just feel like a place to live. It felt like home again, warm, safe, and full of hope. And in that moment, as he looked at the woman who had shown him what real love looked like, he realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength, the kind that changes people. He smiled softly and said, "You were right. It really was just a cake." She looked up, her eyes bright with warmth. "And it really was just a moment," she said. "What matters is what we do after." He nodded. "Then let's make every moment count." And they did, one quiet, beautiful day at a time. Time passed and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But something inside both of them had changed for the better. The house felt lighter now, filled with small moments of care and laughter that had been missing for a long time. They didn't talk much about that night anymore, but it stayed quietly in their memory, serving as a reminder of how easily love could be broken and how beautifully it could be rebuilt. He became more thoughtful. Every morning before she left for work, he made sure her coffee was ready the way she liked it. 2 spoons of sugar and just a bit of milk. It was such a small thing, yet it meant a lot. She noticed it every time but didn't always mention it. She didn't have to. The little things were enough. On weekends, they started doing things together again, grocery shopping, fixing things around the house, or sometimes just sitting on the porch talking about their week. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had learned to be patient with each other, to speak softly even when they disagreed. One Sunday morning, he was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. She walked in, her hair still a little messy from sleep, and sat beside him. "What are you looking at?" she asked. He smiled and turned the album toward her. "Remember this?" he said, pointing at a photo of them from years ago. The two of them covered in flour, laughing in the kitchen after trying to bake cookies together for the first time. She laughed. "Oh, I remember. We burned half of them and the other half tasted like salt." He chuckled. "Yeah, but that was one of my favorite days. We didn't care that the cookies were ruined. We just had fun." She looked at the picture for a while, her smile fading into something softer. "I miss those days sometimes," she said quietly. He reached for her hand. "We can make more days like that," he said. "We don't need everything to be perfect. We just need to keep trying." She squeezed his hand gently. "That's all that matters." Later that day, he went to the same bakery where she had once ordered the red velvet cake. The memory of that night still lingered in his heart, not as a wound anymore, but as a lesson. When he walked in, the smell of fresh cakes and frosting brought everything back. The woman behind the counter recognized him from before. "Back for another cake?" she asked with a friendly smile. He smiled back. "Yeah, but this time I'm paying with a smile." Not a frown. She laughed, wrapping up the cake carefully. When he got home, he placed the box on the table and called her into the kitchen. She walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. "What's this?" she asked. He smiled. "It's just a cake. No occasion. No arguments, just a reminder." She tilted her head. "A reminder of what?" "That we made it through," he said softly. "That we didn't give up." She opened the box and smiled when she saw the simple red velvet cake inside. On top, written in neat icing, were the words, "We keep growing." Her eyes softened. "You really thought about this, didn't you?" He nodded. "I did. I wanted us to have a new memory with this cake. One that feels good," she smiled warmly. "Then let's make one." They cut the cake together, laughing when the frosting got on her fingers. He wiped a bit on her nose, playfully, and she laughed so hard she could barely hold the knife steady. It felt like a scene from years ago, easy, natural, full of light. After they finished eating, she leaned back in her chair, smiling. "You know, if someone told me a few months ago that we'd be sitting here like this again, I might not have believed them." He nodded. "I wouldn't have either. But I guess that's what love is about, holding on even when it's hard." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about what made us change?" He paused for a moment. "Honestly, the way you handled everything. You didn't meet anger with anger. You stayed calm when I lost control. That changed me. I don't think I could ever forget that." She smiled faintly. "I just didn't want us to become strangers. Sometimes silence can heal more than shouting." He nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. "You were right," he said. "That silence taught me more than any argument ever could." The days that followed continued to bring small, beautiful moments. They weren't the kind of couple who posted about their life online or showed off their happiness. Their love was quiet, shown in gestures, glances, and small acts of care. One night, as they sat outside watching the stars, he said softly, "You know, that night with the cake, it could have been the end of us. But instead, it became the start of something better." She nodded. "Sometimes things break so they can be rebuilt stronger." He looked up at the sky and smiled. "That's exactly what happened to us." A few months later, their anniversary came around. This time he planned something special. He didn't spend a lot of money or try to make it fancy. Instead, he recreated the small celebration she had tried to plan before. The same soft music, the same candles, the same red velvet cake. When she walked into the room, she froze for a second. It looked almost identical to that night, except this time there was peace in the air instead of tension. He walked toward her, holding a single flower. "Before you say anything," he began with a smile, "I promise I didn't throw the cake this time." She laughed, shaking her head. "You better not." He handed her the flower and said, "This time, we celebrate the right way." They sat down together, the candlelight flickering softly between them. He lifted his glass and said, "To forgiveness, to patience, to second chances." She lifted hers and added, "And to love that never gives up." They clinked glasses, smiling. For a long moment, they just sat there, quietly watching the candlelight dance across the room. Everything felt right again. Not perfect, just real. And that was enough. Later, after dinner, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small folded note. She looked at him curiously before opening it. It read, "I used to think love was about how happy someone made me. Now I know it's about how much peace someone brings into my life. You are my peace." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. "You're going to make me cry," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Then I've done something right." She set the note down and reached across the table to hold his hand. "You've done a lot right," she said. They sat there hand in hand, the sound of soft music wrapping around them like a blanket. There was no grand ending, no fireworks, just two people who had found their way back to each other after nearly losing it all. Before going to bed that night, she looked at him and said, "You know, people always talk about love like it's supposed to be easy, but I think real love is what happens after the hard parts, when you still choose each other anyway." He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I'll keep choosing you." "Every day," she smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, "and I'll keep choosing you." The room grew quiet again, filled only with the sound of the ticking clock and their steady breathing. The same house that once held anger and silence now felt like a home filled with peace, laughter, and understanding. And in that quiet, both of them knew. Love didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be honest. The red velvet cake had started as a symbol of conflict, but in the end, it became something else entirely. A symbol of forgiveness, growth, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. They would go on to face other challenges, of course. Life always brought them. But now they faced them differently, together, with patience, with grace, because they had learned that love wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning from them. It wasn't about never arguing. It was about making sure every argument ended with understanding. As the lights dimmed that night, he whispered softly, "Thank you for staying." She smiled and replied, "Thank you for changing." And in that simple exchange, everything that needed to be said was said. Love had won, quietly, beautifully, and completely.